at this email. What does it mean?
Communication is the imparting or exchanging of information or
The
news.
single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
Conversation is the oral exchange of sentiments, observations, opinions, or ideas.
Forbes Books Radio presents The Conversation with Clinton M. Padgett.
Welcome back to part 2 of my conversation with Sherry Turkle, professor of the Social Studies of Science and Technology at MIT, the founding director of the MIT Initiative on Technology and Self, and the author of 6 books, including the New York Times bestseller Reclaiming Conversation, as well as the just-released The Empathy Diaries. As we resume the conversation, Sherry is relating her fears that the wrong lessons will be taken from the pandemic.
So that's what I mean in terms of coming out of the pandemic. When, people say, okay, now let's look, we've had this thing, we've really had this experience, we've learned so much, and I fear, I live in terror. Maybe not MIT, maybe not Harvard, maybe not places with big endowments, but I hear all the time of places that are struggling that are going to say, whoa, we were able to get guest lectures from all over the world. We ran seminars from all over the world. It was dynamic. We had breakout groups. We had this kind of thing. We had that kind of thing. Going forward, we are going to continue these dynamic seminars with speakers from all over the world. Sherry Turkle can come and she can give her course on technology and evocative objects. She's the best at that. And we don't have to pay her to come and be an adjunct for a year. She'll just do it, she can film it and that'll be fantastic. Our students can take it remote and da-da-da-da. That we will learn the wrong lesson.
Right.
Because we think this is cheap, fast, cheap, remote, we did it, we all know how to do it. Instead of saying, okay, because I've learned from all these years of just to finish that thought, from all these years of studying people and technology, that people go better than nothing. Okay, the pandemic made it better than nothing. And then the next step is that it's better than anything. Like an IBO for your grandmother is better than nothing because she's allergic to pets. And then it's better than anything because it'll never die and she'll never be sad. Right. It's better than any living pet could ever be. So I'm just concerned about those kinds of things, actually.
I also teach as well, and I teach classes around project management around the world. Right before the pandemic, I was in India for a week and a half, and we were doing 14-hour days to try to get all the stuff in while I was there. I stay in the entire day and I never stop talking. And someone said, where do you get your energy from? And I said, from you. I mean, if I were just sitting in a blank room by myself trying to do that for 14 straight hours, I would be exhausted. But the interaction with the people in the room, the students, the questions, their energy gives me energy. So I think that's one of the things you're talking about. It's such a different feel from when you're doing it in a classroom that you have energy to go walk. But when you're doing it just for Zoom, you want to take some Tylenol, lay down and relax.
Well, it was more than relax. It was
recover, I think.
It was a recovery.
Right.
And I've been talking to students, which is why I got into the thing where my office hours I do as a telephone call, where I can just focus on the voice. I'm relaxed. I'm focusing on the voice. I'm in a good state.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think going back to the other thing you said, which is you hope this is not the new normal, where I think there's going to be pushback not only on folks like you, but also from the students, because from what I've seen, there have been places where the students are pushing back saying, I paid for the full college experience and I'm not getting that, right? Yeah. I'm not getting the whole, if I'm staying at home the whole time, then why am I paying X fee? I should only pay half of that or a third of that. And so I think hopefully that'll also help stop this from becoming the new way we do things.
Well, but there's also the employers. There's also employers. My daughter and my son-in-law are working remotely, and I can see the strain on them. It's great. They're not flying all over the world. They're not doing, there are a lot of things that it has that, certainly saved money and they've developed certain kinds of skills, but it's a lot is lost.
Sure.
And it's easy to say what's lost is not important.
Right. Yeah, I think one of the reasons that I prefer conversation is the fact that you're allowed to ask clarifying questions since you are having a dialogue. And I don't believe personally that we can achieve the same level of clarity by using emojis and emoticons. And you share a couple of stories in your writings that indicate you might feel similarly. I think they have to do with punctuation is one of them.
Yes.
Or lack thereof.
Right.
I think it's trying to trying to interpret what an emoji means is confusing, and at least to people who don't speak that language. I know one person I was talking to had sent someone a thumbs up, and that person interpreted it as a middle finger.
Yeah.
And so,
Oh, there's so many miscommunications. When I became very anxious during COVID, I escaped to the sea and had a kind of writer's, I don't know what to call it. Hut is not fair to it, but a writer's, what's in between a hut?
Bungalow?
Writer's,
A writer's bungalow?
Bungalow at the sea. And then, of course, when it got very cold, somebody else allowed me to stay in there. A dear friend allowed me to stay in their house so I could renovate my house and winterize it, so that I'm hoping there won't be a COVID again, so that I could really move back into my renovated bungalow. I like that. It's a very sweet little house, but now it's a year-round house. It was just a house that you couldn't stay in year-round. We had a couple of space heaters, so all of the communication has been online. No visiting. Finally, there was a face-to-face meeting in masks between me and the builder, 6 feet apart, in which he brought the joists and he brought his little materials. And it was great. It was like decisive. That, good, done, bye. It's kind of
Right.
all the angry emails and, saying I wouldn't pay.
It's amazing how quickly that can escalate.
Oh my God. And I was becoming like the client from hell, and he was becoming the contractor, who was being unfairly treated. And that's like, I'm not totally not like that, it was just like, and I was thinking, why am I being so abused? And he was feeling like, oh my God, who is this diva? Who is this diva? I'm really not. I said, just bring everything. Just lay it on a table. I'm so decisive. I will just lay it on a table. I'll just that.
Right. Yeah, people think they're saving time by reverting to the text when they're not.
A great value in engineering is what's called friction-free. Things being, right. I talk about this a lot in the Empathy Diaries, of teaching and being in a place where one of the highest values is friction-free. But relationships with your daughter or with your mother or with your workers should not necessarily be friction-free, or with right. students. I mean, it's from human. If we think we're going to get into a better place in our country on the things that divide us by being friction-free, that is really not going to happen. We're going to get out of it by being empathic.
Right.
That's Agreed. Different from friction-free. So engineering values, all the great AI software for conflict resolution, God bless them. God bless them. But we better learn how to deal with empathy and friction to get where we need to go. I mean, that really is basically what I'm saying.
I think a story that really personifies what you're talking about, the impact of emotions being expressed through emojis or text versus face-to-face, was when Haley, home from on college break, broke one of the house rules about calling or texting her mom to let her know she was going to be out all night. It had happened several times, and her mom had expressed her irritation through texting, and it got to the point where Haley was just, okay, that's just the contract we signed. If I stay out all night without telling her, she's going to get mad over text messages. But it was really, her opinion changed significantly when she came home after one of those nights and saw that her mom had been up all night crying.
Right.
And what she said was, if I find it here, I saw her face. That can't be conveyed via text. There's something that is conveyed in emotions and facial expressions. The way it made me feel didn't come from her words.
Right. We're human beings. We're people. I mean, I think this interview would even be different if I couldn't see your face.
Right.
I mean, it's just, the face is the face, the eyes, and then that's what's missing is, of course, being in the presence of the person. You see the body language. You see, I remember I was in a conversation with a student, and it was a student who hadn't done well. And this was a student, very kind of alpha male guy. I'm an engineer. I'm going to be the best engineer. I'm going to work for Google. I'm going to, da, da, da. And in this interview, he had not done well. He had not done well in this paper. I tried to coach him, but he'd I think it was just his last priority was to do well in this class, which involved writing. I think he was just doing a zillion other things at MIT. And I saw in this meeting with me, when he saw that he hadn't gotten like an A or an A minus, which I think were the only two grades that he, thought like he could get, his body crumpled, but his mouth was still alpha male. And I said, you really, I was very modest. I think that's something like, I think this really upsets you. And he looked at me like I had found out like the most terrible secret about him. And he says, this really upsets me. And I said, well, did you think it would happen? Because, you didn't put in that much work on this paper. And I told you several times along the year that, because I give a lot of feedback. He said, because I'm so smart, I didn't think anybody would ever, because, he knows that he's kind of. And I said, well, if I gave you, until the end of, if I gave you like till the end of the semester, just before grades are due and not when they're normally due, and graded you down one half point, like from A to A minus, or, from A plus to A, would you like a chance to work more hours on this paper? And he said, absolutely. And he turned in, I think, an A plus paper and ended up with an A, or an A paper and ended up with an A minus.
Right.
But if we were having this on the phone and I just heard that sort of what the hell with you sound coming out of his mouth, but I saw this kind of this deflation of his body.
Right.
And I thought, this is really bad for him. So, I'm just saying I'm saying the obvious here is that why, and this I think is my point about technology, is that technology wants us to be on the screen. Okay, of course it is, because it's technology and it has a lot of screens. What do we want? Technology wants us to talk to robot psychotherapists. Every day I'm called by the New York Times or the Washington Post. That's my life. I have a robot psychotherapist. It's supposed to be really fantastic. Do you want to try it out? It's the best. We're writing an article about it. Everybody has it. Everybody wants it now. It's the biggest thing. I know technology wants us to have them.
Right.
Is it good for us? I'm afraid of COVID. Is my talking to a robot the right person for me to talk to? Or should I talk to somebody who has a body and who knows what it would feel like to be on a ventilator? I would really rather choose that. Not because I have anything against robots. Or chatbots. I think they're brilliant. But I really know that there's something about not being able to see my child during the process and of being intubated. And that is, to me, a body thing, a person thing. I want to talk to a person.
Right.
Not some robot that will have 1,700, 117, 117,000, 117 million things that it can say to me because it knows it's like super smart. It's not afraid of dying. It's of no interest to me.
One of the things you wrote that I really liked that actually applies very well in this the situation you were just describing with your student who you saw him deflate on the call. It says, conversation is a kind of intimacy. You don't just get more information, you get different information. And that's what you were really saying is the different information you got was him deflating, which you couldn't hear that on the phone, but you could see it over video. And I think that, someone listening to us right now who doesn't know you and hasn't read your work or watched some of your TED Talks might think that you're against technology, but that's not true at all, is it?
No. And I don't think that's what's coming across here either, is it? I think
I agree.
that I hope not. To those people who think I'm against technology, I say this, I really am not. I think that we just have to learn to ask a different question of technology, which is this the right technology for the job? And when it is, I embrace it. Or sometimes technology is the right thing to use in the beginning of a job. And then you should shift and put the technology away and go to a different thing. Talking is a kind of technology. It just doesn't involve bits and bytes and electronics at the end. But, talking technology is a kind of technology. There are a range of ways in which we communicate and we can be. But I'm definitely not against technology. And honestly, I'm surrounded here by I have 3 computers, one mystery technology that won't stop dinging, and I have a phone, I have a pad. My kitchen is like a it's kind of like a laboratory of technological wonder.
No, I was thinking that if I'm someone who doesn't want to put my phone down for 3 seconds, to hear you say I need solitude, I would be thinking you're anti-technology. But I love what you said was, my argument is not anti-technology, it's pro-conversation.
Yes, that's really how
think,
I feel, is that if your use of technology doesn't keep you away from the conversations that matter, then I think you are exactly where you need to be. That's how I feel. But I'm worried that parents go to the park and they're not talking to their kids, they're on their phones. So I say to that mother or that father, you're not where you need to be. And that's not about their technology, it's about their kid. But if that mother, when they're in the park with their child, is like completely in harmony with their child, playing with their child, reading with their child, playing on the swings, I'm not going to, pursue them home and say, well, your phone use is too much. I just care about their relationship with their child. I like that quote. I'm not anti-technology. I'm pro-conversation.
Yeah, I mean, if you read the Empathy Diaries, it's very clear that you're not against technology. You were married to Seymour Papert, one of the pioneers of AI. You were friends with Marvin Minsky, the co-founder of MIT's AI lab. And one of your early mission statements that you used when writing for grants was, I want to study how computers change not only what we do, but who we are. It wasn't, I want to get rid of computers.
No.
So clearly you're not anti-technology.
No. But it's interesting that the computers that I was most interested in were computers where you could understand something about how they worked. So you could learn about the computer by using the computer. And as the computers became more opaque, I felt that something was lost.
Right.
When they became more like an appliance and you sort of couldn't learn about them, anything, as you used them. I thought that was a wonderful thing about the early computer culture that I think very few children today get an opportunity to experience. And maybe that will come back. Maybe there'll be, also, one thing about me is that I think I'm a little bit different than a lot of the people in this game. Is I think we're at the beginnings of the computer culture. I don't think we're at the end of it. And I
Right.
think that we're just starting to see how this is going to go.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite lines, actually mentioned my TED Talk, is one line that I really slaved over was, just because we grew up with the computer culture, we think the computer culture is all grown up. Whereas actually it's in its infancy. And we should treat it as though it's in its infancy, because we would be much better off. We would be much better off, and we would have less of this. Oh, the horse is out of the barn. That's the one thing most people say. The horse is out of the barn. There's nothing to do. The horse is out of the barn. It's too late. We can't do anything. The horse is not that much out of the barn. I mean,
it's still in sight.
Yeah. What? It's still in sight.
It's still in sight. We might be able to catch it.
Yeah, I mean, it's usually used as a reason why there's like nothing we can do to change our way of being with technology. I think it's a very, very dangerous, way of thinking. It really is a dangerous way of thinking.
Well, I think it's ironic that even tech companies like Google recognize the value of conversation and collaboration with others in a shared physical space, to the point of engaging experts to determine the optimal amount of time for their employees to stand in a cafeteria line to maximize conversations, the length of the tables in the dining hall to promote sitting together and joining ongoing conversations, and then creating specially designed physical spaces called garages where people come together to work with concrete materials to encourage thought, talk, and new ideas.
Yes.
So even the tech companies recognize the collaboration is done better, or certainly, I'd say done better when it's side by side, and the conversation does matter.
Yes. But then what's interesting about that chapter that I wrote about, I did write a chapter that was based on time I spent with Google. When they actually get ready to implement this, they don't really do what they say they're going to do, because they want everybody on their system all the time. And so while they're busy with all these things that are going to keep everybody talking, they also want everybody on their system all the time in a way that prevents talking.
One of the things I hear a lot about is how much more people are getting done by multitasking. And I was hoping you could bust that myth that multitasking actually increases productivity.
Yes, there's no such thing as multitasking. The brain is able to do one thing at a time. So when we're multitasking, we're actually, and there are great studies that show that when you're multitasking, you're doing everything worse. So for every task you add, you're doing all your tasks worse. But you have the illusion, and this is what is so pernicious, that you're doing everything better. So it's like when you multitask, you take a drug that makes you think you're doing all the tasks better, when in fact you're doing every task worse. So it really is like putting yourself into kind of drugged state where you say, drug me and make me less efficient and less productive, but I'll feel better, so I won't care. And that is how I live my life. And so everybody's less productive and happier. It's a recipe for like disaster. And actually, my reputation as being against technology actually comes from my being, I think, against multitasking, which people are so fond of, that when I enter the room, it's like, oh my God, she's going to take my multitasking away.
Well, one of the studies you mentioned shows that on average, an office worker is distracted electronically every 3 minutes, and it takes an average of 23 minutes to get back on track.
And we know this is true. Has anybody ever, that's our experience of trying to write a paper or do any, and then what happens is, and this is always happens to me. So, I mean, it's not that because it happens to me, I know it's true. But what happens is you finally say, oh, forget it, I'll just do my email.
Right.
And that is, since you have so much of that, that becomes the end of this depressing cycle. You just say, oh, I'll just forget that, I'll just do my email. And that's how this all it comes to. That's how all this ends.
Yeah, I think on two last questions. I think on a personal level, when you're having a face-to-face conversation with someone and then pause the conversation to check your phone, aren't you sending the message that you value more what's on the other side of that phone than you do the person that's in the room with you?
When I interview people get very upset about the message they think they're sending. They say, no, my wife understands, or my daughter understands, or my family is understood. So I hesitate to say in general what message you're saying. But you have to ask yourself, for the relationship you're in, what does it mean to put people on pause? The first time it was done to me, I was talking about it with a student who had just had the experience when it was all fresh. And he said, I felt like a tape recorder that had been turned, that I felt like an object that had been turned off. I mean, you are saying you're talking to somebody where a conversation is something that can just be stopped, as opposed to a conversation being an emotional connection that you're kind of involved in, like a river. So it is important. Let's just say it is important, this thing you're doing, and you should think about it.
Yeah, I think conversations are clearly impactful. And if I kind of tie a bow on it with what I got out of the Empathy Diaries is, whether the conversation is an awkward and unpleasant one, like some of the ones you described with your biological father, or the ones you weren't able to have or didn't have with your mother, they still have an impact on your development as a human being.
Yes. And I think in the Empathy Diaries, the conversations, the reason that book means so much to me is that I talk so much about the conversations I didn't have, as well as the conversations I did, and how much it would have meant to have the ones I didn't have.
No, you were very, very open and personal, and I really appreciated that about when I read the book. So obviously your books are available on Amazon, and in preparation for this, I read 2 of them at least. So I highly recommend them. But if someone wants to learn more about you and your work you do, how can they do that?
I think my books are the best way into me and the work I do. I think my books are best. I think the Empathy Diaries is a good introduction into the question of what makes a person's work lit from within. In other words, there aren't that many books that really ask, why is this person doing this? I when I was writing it, I looked for books that were kind of example books, and I don't think there are that many example books that really say, why is this scientist, why is this researcher doing this? I mean, I know that they're excited and it's very important work, but what is the passion? I know science is important and it's really, obviously we've got to discover, the vaccine, but is there something else? I think that I hope people read this new book because I think that we all want to know why we do our work. And I hope it opens a conversation about what motivates us, how can we get a better grip on our relationship with technology coming out of the pandemic, how can we think about coming out of the pandemic? And then I actually, for a reader who wants to, begin with my work, I would read Reclaiming Conversation next, just as you did, because I think that sort of covers the arc of my career. And then Alone Together, because I think that Alone Together really is a book where I put together, as I said, 16 years of very tightly studied, research and armies of students and,
Right.
and taxpayer money and but I would read this one first because it's so personal and I think it's very unusual and it's a book of the heart. It's a passionate book.
Well, that's certainly the order that I read them in. I read The Empathy Diaries first, then I read Reclaiming Conversation, and I have Alone Together on my desk to read next. So, Sherry, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for the conversation.
Thank you. I've really loved this. Thank you. And thank you to your listeners. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to The Conversation with Clinton M. Padgett. To find out more about Clint, go to projectsuccess.com or pick up Clint's book, The Project Success Method, at Amazon.com. This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio.